Since time is limited and there's a lot to do, I noticed that nobody sent me any questions. Um, and it may be because it's just all so daunting. Um, so I decided, because I didn't have any questions sent to me, I thought that maybe we should just kind of work through the document, and I'll highlight things as we flip through it. I didn't prepare um, any slides this time, because I thought that we would probably mostly be looking at the document itself. So I don't know I mean, a lot of you, hopefully everyone's had a chance to take a look at the document. I know it is quite lengthy, so it's not necessarily a fun read if you're just sitting down to read the whole thing, but hopefully, because it is lengthy and we have so many examples in here, that it'll be a nice resource if you do come across issues, that you'll be able to find at least some answers to those issues um, as you encounter them. So let's go ahead and start scrolling here. I guess, the first thing is, does everyone understand traced versus untraced series? Are there any questions regarding that?
Anna, did you see Ellen's note?
Yes, thank you, Ellen. Yes, it is very daunting, and that's the thing, is that it's a lot to remember, and hopefully with the document you won't have to remember so much, because you can look it up. I was thinking, now that we have this document, it might be worthwhile to create like a quick cheat sheet. That way people can just pull that out, especially for things like punctuation and formatting. It might be helpful to just have something a little easier to look at and pull up on your computer for quick access.
That's a good idea, Anna. I'm making a note of that so we can work on that.
um, any other? So, I mean, I think traced and untraced series, that's pretty straightforward. As you can see from the document, the biggest thing to look is the indicator. If it's the indicator will be 0 if it's untraced, and it'll be 1 if it is traced. That said, so I think it's easy to find that in the record. The tricky part with traced and untraced series, and I'm going to scroll down a little here to the note that I put in the document about Library of Congress and series, is that because the Library of Congress is no longer tracing series and they're no longer creating series authority records, what we're seeing in a lot of the records for newer items and newer series is that no series information is included in the records to import. And if there is series information, and some of you have probably noticed this, that we're 490s with a 0 as the first indicator. So they're popping up that the records are being created with series information, but only with untraced series information. The thing is that for the most part, we want to trace our series because, well, there's not much of a point to having untraced series because that information isn't searchable. So basically what that means for catalogers is that we're going to have to do a lot more correction of records and a lot more looking up of series information. So like I think 9 times out of 10, maybe even 9.9 times out of 10, if you do see a record that has a 490 with the 0 as that first indicator, it's not going to be untraced, at least for our purposes, right? Really, the only untraced series statements that you would want to leave as untraced are things like what we see on the screen here, like these kind of general publisher series like Penguin Classics, right? And most people don't really need to search the catalog to find all of the Penguin Classic editions. So that can get left as an untraced series, but anything else, most likely we're going to want to change to a trace series. So let me actually pull up an example here. Where is it? I think here. Oops. So here is a book that that we just received at Hood River called The Revenge of Magic. I haven't actually cataloged it. It's not in Sage yet. So I'm pulling it up here. I'm going to go ahead and import it so we can actually take a look at the record. Sorry, my computer's a little slow. So here we see, oops, not, why is it scrolling? It's just being slow to scroll. Here we go. Okay, so here you'll see that the record to import has just that 490, that untraced series information, the 490 with the 0 first indicator. So this obviously would need to be changed. I will go ahead and change that here. So we'll turn it into a trace series. Of course, that also means that because it was originally untraced, you'll see that there is no 800 information included at the bottom of the record. One of the things that I generally do to make it a lot easier to add the 800 is I will copy the information from the 100 field to make sure that I have the authorized heading for the author. Paste that in. Of course, you do have to remember to change that to an 800 field. And then we can go ahead and enter the, what was it was just, I think it was Revenge of Magic. Magic. And what was it? I think it was the first volume, right? So 01, and then I won't save that, but just I think this is something that we're going to have to do more now because LOC is not tracing those series. Any questions about that?
This is Ellen. Do you know why they decided not to trace the series anymore?
I think I saw that it was labor intensive, so for financial reasons, they had to kind of cut out that part of the workflow. And so now that was, I think that was back in 2006. So
yeah, we still do see series headings in LOC, but it's hit or miss.
Right. So the thing is, if it's a series that was started prior to May 2006, I think then we're more likely to find that series information, or an authorized heading for that series in LOC. Obviously, if it's after May 2006, since they weren't even they stopped creating series authority records, we're less likely to find information about those series.
But you should always check. That's still a thing.
Right. So why don't, actually, since we're talking about that, let's go to, I've pulled, let's see, so here we've got a Library of Congress authorities page. And I'm not sure, Beth, do you remember? I don't think I saw this. Did the series, the locating series information in LOC get posted to catalogers, the one that John and Heather created? So been able to access this document yet?
Oh, I'm not sure. I know it was sent out, and I can double check on the website and make sure it's there.
Let's see. I think this is, wait. This is actually, I think because looking at this, and this is a different version than I have printed out in front of me. Oh, it looks like maybe an extra page got added. Heather, you're there. Do you know,
Well, the first page is just about the searching established series in Sage. The second page is the actual LOC authorities one.
Oh, right. Oh, right. I see. You added another page. So I don't have that printed out in front of me. So we'll get this uploaded to the Sage website, but it provides information for how to do a search in LOC and in Sage. Let's just quickly take a look at this. So if we take an example, let's see here. The best way is to start with a name title search, because if you do that, then you won't just get an author's name, but then you'll get the titles that are associated with that particular author. So if we type in Patterson James, oops, sorry, darn LOC authority. Try that again. So we see here Patterson with the different titles. If we scroll to, if we're looking for the private novel series, just gonna move forward a little bit here. Not sure if it might be, no, it's probably one more page. Yeah. Sorry again for how slow. I don't know if that actually went through. Let's try it again. Yes. So here we have private novels. This is showing an authorized heading. So let's go ahead and click on that. And here we have in that 100 field the authorized series heading for the private novels. One of the things, and again, this is all in the document that Heather and John created, you don't want to use, you do want to be checking the 100 field, or alternatively, if it's a 130, because there are multiple authors, you want to actually be using the title that's listed there as opposed to what's listed in a 430 field. These are variants of the series titles, and we're not using those. Not sure why private novels appears here as a 430 as well. I don't know if Beth or Heather can speak to that, but we do want to focus on the 100.
Does that have to do with the use of a possible 830 rather than an 800?
Because they used to use 830s as a rule instead of 800 fields.
Yes.
Right.
So it's a C instead, you know, or yeah. As Anna mentioned, you know, just use the one that's in the main entry.
Do we have questions about that? Let's go back to, let's do a search again. So if we do it specifically by
I have a question.
Title. Yes.
That's Ellen.
Ellen? Yes.
It's always Ellen. I was told a long time ago now, well, I don't know, at least a few months, that when you're looking in the author headings and there's multiple choices, and say I had a James Patterson private novel, I was told not to use the ones that have the series title, but to just use the plain old James Patterson one. So that's what I've been doing for months on many, many books. So there's a lot of, I guess that would mean that there's a lot of incorrect records out there that I have done.
Are you just talking about the Sage tag?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
That's not a big deal.
Okay, in the future though, should I go ahead and use the Sage tag that has the series name on it?
Are you, let's see.
You might need to give us an example, Ellen, because I'm not sure we're understanding what you're referring to.
So the Sage tags, right, is what she's referring to, is when she's doing the authorized part. If you right click on it and you can choose a option. And
yeah,
she's been choosing
under line 100.
Let's go to
So I think they're just tags. We don't sort by the zero tags, do we, in Sage?
No, we don't. They're just used for authority references.
Ellen, are you, oh, so this isn't going to work because this is too new. It's not going to show up.
If this is a what do you call it? A diversion from what you had planned to do, I can write an email and explain it or something like that.
No, it's okay. I think I guess it would be helpful to for others if we, unfortunately my computer is so slow that it's like taking a while to pull this stuff up. I wish we could quickly dash back and forth between these things. Let's just any old Patterson. and see, I think, and pull up that series information to make sure we understand what you're talking about.
So one of the things I wanted to mention is that although Library of Congress stopped supplying authorities for series, we still get series authorities brought in from our authority vendor. So we still, I guess, have authorities in Sage that might not be in Library of Congress.
Okay, so on the example you have on the screen right now, in line 100, if you right click on that, it gives you the Sage authorities, where it says Patterson
Right.
James 1947 dash.
I don't know why it's not. Oh, here we go. Right. So, well, we can take anything, I suppose, here to look at. Oh, well, that's not.
So you've just been using the James Patterson author entry only, right? That you were saying?
Yeah. And I've actually noticed that on a lot of authors, there's actually two or three author entries with different numbers, and I'm not sure which one to use.
They might be duplicate authority records, and I need to delete one of them, Ellen.
Okay.
So here, right? So you're saying that you are not selecting this so that this part appears in the record, right?
Yeah, see on field 100 in the document itself, in the record itself, all it says is James Patterson, and then it says field D 1947. That's where I right click.
And
And
Beth, right, doesn't that get, when you do those updates, doesn't that stuff get automatically added if it applies?
Yes. Those tags do not need to be added to the record. They will be added later when I run a database script.
okay.
Right, so this is perfectly fine. Ellen, if you are entering in the information, like with this 800 here, well, that's actually probably wouldn't be because it should be private novels, right? So this is probably the wrong series heading for this particular item, but otherwise just including, right, the subfield A, the subfield D if it applies, the subfield T and B is on. It looks like this one probably just hasn't been updated, or hasn't been updated because this information is actually incorrect. So yes, you're doing it as you should.
Okay, Beth, when you do the updates, does it correct mistakes too?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So it will correct this, Beth? To private novels? No.
No,
That's not a
think
thing.
so.
It would just correct the tag. When we do authority processing and there's error reports that are generated, it's possible that I would find errors like this in those error reports. But because series isn't authorized everywhere, it would be an individual basis. When I'm checking a report, it might be hard to decipher.
And it seems like this is why it's so difficult to work with, to have the series information correct, is because, you know, we basically have to do the cleanup ourselves. And so, you know, we're seeing a lot of inconsistencies in the records, in the way that series titles are entered, precisely because it's it's not really possible to have these have those corrected. Beth, it looks like Jenny sent in a chat. Can you still right click in the web client?
No, there's a blue icon to click on instead, rather than a right click.
Oh, right. That's at the very end of the.
Yes.
It would be like here.
Yeah.
So we might have to update our documents to show screenshots of the web client as well.
Yeah, eventually. Eventually.
So let's see if we go back to here, Library of Congress authorities. So we'll even see here like series title, a non-series title. If we click, I hope it hasn't, it's probably gonna shut me out again. Yep. I wish they would give a little more time before it times out.
I noticed that they're having system performance issues. There's a message at the top too, so.
Yes. Although I think they're always quick to now. Let's see. So it'll bring us back to the authority record here. And so again, we're back to that same screen we were at before that shows the 100. I think, we can, this stuff is really complicated, working with Library of Congress authorities, also working with SAGE authorities, and I think what we probably need to do is just do a session dedicated to that because it is quite lengthy. So rather than spending more time going over that, we could save that for later if there aren't any other specific questions. So why don't we move on? Let's see. Oh, so one of the things, just a little recommendation on my part, and other people can chime in terms of how they organize their workflow. For me, when I'm importing records, basically because I'm importing mostly new items. I tend not to have LOC as the first thing that I'm searching for series information because for the most part, I'm not going to find it. So I always just have a tab with Fantastic Fiction open, and then I'll quickly type in the author's name for any fiction items, just so that I can see if it's even part of a series or not. Generally, that information is correct. I think when you do a lot of series, you kind of can see flat, red flags, and it's easier to see, to determine whether you need to really investigate that series information a little bit more. But I think that just in terms of workflow, I understand that all of us are pressed in time with our cataloging duties, and so I do think it is very difficult if you have to, if the first thing that you're looking at is LOC, and then you're having to, kind of do a lot of research just to figure out whether it is a part of a series or not. Others, Beth, Heather, I don't know who else is here, if anyone wants to comment on that or have their own.
I generally just scan the ISBN into Goodreads to see if it's part of a series for me. And then if it is, I'll check LOC to see if it's an authority, if there is an authority.
So I guess I'm wondering about the idea of looking to see if there's an authority and record in SAGE already before going to LOC.
Yeah, that's probably a good way of doing it. I think we should probably offer then a training on working with SAGE authorities, just so that I think that, you know, it can get so complicated doing those, trying to look that stuff up in SAGE. Why don't we go ahead and plan on doing a training on that?
Okay.
But I mean, they're not technically SAGE authorities if they're just a whole bunch of series titles that happen to be the same.
I think one of the difficulties with looking at SAGE, so there are advantages of going to LOC, advantages of going to SAGE, and disadvantages of both, in the sense that, right, there's very often with LOC, you're not going to find, it may be part of it, you're not necessarily going to find that information in LOC. With SAGE, I think one of the difficulties is that because we have a lot of inconsistency right now, we haven't been able to do as much cleanup as we would like with the series. I think if you go to the SAGE authorities, right? Am I correct, Beth, that you might find multiple options and still not know which is the one to choose?
Hopefully not. If you go to the authority file itself, you know, we periodically run our records or send them to the authority vendor and get records back, and they give me deletions for things that are no longer authority headings. So my hope or expectation is that our authority file would be up to date. Would the individual records be correct? Possibly not.
Okay. So right, why don't we go ahead and do a session on that? Let's see. Anne, on page 4, could you list the 100 info with 490 since the author note says it should match? On page 4, what are we on page 4 of the
Series document?
of the series document? Let's see, let me pull that up again. Page 4. So, you mean, Anne, could you list the 8? Oh, you mean that to update the documentation and add that 100 fields in our guidelines? Is that what you're asking? Anne's still here. Oh, there. Yes. Okay. Yes, we will make that.
Yeah, I mean, you have it in that box, you know, that it should match the 100 field to the right there. So,
Oops. I scrolled too far. And this information here,
yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
But yeah, so maybe what we could do is, at least on the cheat sheet, maybe add that 100 so that you're kind of seeing all of those fields by side.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Any other questions? Let's maybe scroll down here to numbers and series numbering. So if you recall, right, LOC provides series title information, but it's still not going to provide series numbering. So you're going to have to consult an outside source for that information. The SAGE preferred source is Fantastic Fiction, and obviously we want to stay consistent. And since sometimes what we're seeing is that that numbering can vary depending on the source, from between Fantastic Fiction, Novelist, and Goodreads, that we do recommend that that Sage catalogers use Fantastic Fiction, just so that we can maintain that consistency within the catalog. Let's see. So, right, you want to, for the 490 field, it's best to type the, if the number is included on the item itself, you can go ahead and transcribe it as it appears on the item. But in the field, you're always going to want to convert that to an Arabic number. And, you know, remember, we want to use this specific format from from 1 to 9 is to include that 0. It just helps with the sorting in the search display, so that patrons are more likely to get an ordering system that makes sense. And you've probably already seen that in the catalog, that a lot of times, you know, you'll get like number 15 and then it'll jump to number 9 and things like that. And I think it's just confusing for patrons. And of course, very often, because the numbers aren't included on the item itself, anytime we're outside information, we want to make sure that we're using the brackets. But of course, with the 800 field, we don't use any brackets there.
Also, if there is a BK in the 800 field, in the 800 V field, it should be removed.
Right, so we only want to have the number in the 800 field. Again, for sorting purposes, it throws it off if you've added a BK or a V, an extra V.
And most of the time, if you bring in a record from Z3950, it will not be this way. So it's something we're changing as Sage libraries.
And Beth, when you say it will not be this way, do you mean there won't be series information, or it won't be formatted in this way?
It won't be formatted in this way. Typically, I'll see a BK, and I'll remove that before saving the record.
Oh, right, in the 800 field.
Yeah, in the 800 field, yes.
Yeah, so it's good to check that in the 800 field, even if you see that the 800 field is present in the record.
And of course, it's not going to have the 500 fields either.
Right. And so that's something that you'll need to add. Although we do have a lot of records, right, where we're importing them, and the person who created that record to import did not specify where they got the information, even though it's clear that they got it from an outside source, because we find brackets. You know, I don't know, and others can chime in whether they think that we should still look up and add a 500, or if it's okay to leave it, since you weren't the one that entered that information in the first place. Thoughts?
I think when I've been... Yeah, go ahead, John.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say that goes back to a conversation we've had with the mentor group. So. about what level of people are doing like series cleanup and things like that. So
in general, I think I've just left it as is and not added the 500 unless I'm cataloging it from scratch. If I'm bringing in a record that already has a series notation in Z39.50, I haven't been adding the 500.
Yeah, I leave it as it is unless I, for some reason, end up looking up that series information, because when I catalog the item, I see that maybe something is funny going on with other items in that series, and actually go and try and clarify that information. Then I will add a 500, but I as well will just leave it as is. And you know, one of the things is that a lot of this stuff, you know, if the mentors are doing more cleanup, then we can kind of catch these things, but we can kind of assume that if somebody else had already found that information, you can, you know, perhaps assume that it is correct, and that if we find that it is incorrect later, then we can go in and start doing verification and research on that particular series. Let's see, oh, I wanted to remember, where do I have, just kind of scroll back here to the punctuation notes. One of the things that I wanted to bring up, just a little reminder that the punctuation and spacing does matter. So do pay attention to these punctuation notes. I also wanted to pull up some other resources. Let's see, here we go. So Evergreen, Indiana, the website has a little sheet for punctuation that some of you might find useful. I think it's always difficult to remember which entries require a period at the end and which do not. So it's helpful to have this kind of information. As you know, the 490 does not take a period at the end, but the 8XX fields always do. And I think I have another document here that, so here's a document that talks a little bit about spacing. Recall, it's really important to make sure that there is no space between the semicolon if you're entering the book number, that there's no space between the semicolon and the subfield, and that you leave a space before that. With most of the other indicators, you're not going to need to leave any sort of spacing. Now, one thing that I noticed, so I know everyone kind of works differently when they're entering in information. I tend to use the flat text editor because I find it easiest. It's like, it's just a more natural typing experience for me. I know that Beth, I think you tend to use the regular editor. One of the things that used to be the case, and I don't know if this is why we're having some display problems with the updated version of Evergreen, is that it's not necessarily adding, before you could enter this information without any spaces, and that's the recommendation to with this punctuation, is that you shouldn't put spaces between the between subfields. So where we have it here, like it ends in there's no space between California and the period, and then the designator for the subfield B, the only spaces that you're going to find are in, right, the, like, kind of the names and themselves. I think that is just recently stopped happening in the desktop client, where it's not automatically then adding in back a space, as you see here, between the position and the designator. It looks like there's some chats. I'm sorry, I'm trying to scroll back to the chats.
So Jenny said Deborah Blitz taught the CM period as a symbol and always has a period. Now it's different. And I said because CM is a symbol, it does not require a period. I think that's what was decided on.
Right. And inch does, but centimeter does not.
The only way that there's a period at the end of centimeter is if there is a 490 field.
And Ellen, links to punctuation documents, yes. Send you links to those documents. Any other questions about punctuation and spacing? So, guess we'll continue to move on here. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down. We've kind of gone through some of the key points I wanted to highlight for.
Anna, before we closed out the session
Oh,
today, did you want to go over sub-series? The punctuation's a little different with those.
Yeah, so, well, let's see. Yeah, let me scroll down here to these special cases, and we're not going to talk a lot about those. It was mostly, I did want to talk about the punctuation for that stuff because it is a little confusing. So here we go. I think our got the right. Oh, here we go. Oops. Sorry. So remember that with all of these special cases, and we have, split series and multiple series, and very often we can have subtitles and part titles for these series. And so here we have an example of Warriors where the authorized heading for this particular series is Warriors, comma, Super Edition. But then we have another series or sub-series within the Warrior series where it's Warriors Vision of Shadows, and Vision of Shadows is treated as a part title as opposed to a subtitle. So do pay attention to the authorized format of these series titles, and that sometimes it can get tricky because, for instance, oops, scroll down a little further. oops. That that here we have sometimes the 800 field can uses it, displays it in a different way, so that the subtitle is actually used as a part title, even though here in the T5 it comes up as a subfield B. Sorry, that wasn't, I don't think I explained that very clearly, but do pay attention to these different formats for subfields in series titles. And if we scroll down, let me scroll down a little further. Well, actually, let me get to that in a minute. We'll talk about graphic and manga, where things get a little bit trickier in terms of subfield P's and subfield N's. Beth, did you wanna add something there with regard to punctuation and subfields for the series titles?
That covered it. There's just some different punctuation and subfields when you've got subseries, and so I just wanted them to see an example.
Okay. One of the things that I did want us to take a look at today is, sorry, we're just going to scroll through a lot of these complicated instances. You know, probably we wanted to have some examples of that so that you're aware of the issues that come up with a lot of these special cases. It's probably best to contact the mentors to work through what's going on. But at least you can get a sense from these examples that sometimes you might need multiple series statements and how to lay that out. But so here, I wanted to jump down to the inclusion of series information in the 245 field, just because a lot of times it's very difficult to determine what is the book title and what is the series title. I have an example here. Did I put it? Here we go. So if we go back to Train to Impossible Places, on the item itself, nowhere on the outside of the item do you find the actual book title, A Cursed Delivery, right? It's only on the title page that you will actually find A Cursed Delivery. And so with these kinds of items, right, it can be particularly difficult to know what is the series title and what is the book title, particularly if it's the first in a series. So sometimes a little investigation needs to be done, and you can contact the mentors to help figure this out. But here, this is the correct format for a record like this. It should be A Cursed Delivery, and then Train to Impossible Places listed in the series statements. We have changed our rules to be a little bit more flexible because we've seen a lot more records that display very prominently the series information and information on the title page as though it's part of the title. So we have adjusted the guidelines so that if you do want to add a series title because it is listed on the title page, you can do so but only as a subfield B, right? So you don't want to have list the series title in this way, where it's in the 245, where it's a subfield A, and then the book title is listed as a subfield B. If you do want to have this order, you can do that in a 246, just not in the 245.
Would the exception to this be manga?
Right, so the exception is manga. I do have another exception. I forgot to pull up this example. And it's the Ivy and Bean series, and we have this, we find this a lot with children's series in particular, is that in a number of most of the items in the Ivy and Bean series the book title starts with Ivy and Bean. So here we have Ivy and Bean Bound to be Bad, and Ivy and Bean Take Care of the Babysitter, Ivy and Bean and the Ghost That Had to Go. So here we have an exception to that, where Ivy and Bean, no news is good news, right? The title was not printed as a full sentence. And so in this case, what happened is that the record is showing is using sorry. Here we've got the series title as a subfield A in the 245, and the book title as a subfield B. So at least from my perspective, and other mentors can add their 2 cents here, for me it seems like kind of the one exception where it could be okay to leave that as with the series title as a subfield A, just because it helps in terms, like, it just kind of maintains a little bit more of that consistency in that series, where people might be looking for where all of the other titles do start with Ivy and Bean. Any mentors want to have a difference of opinion on that?
No, my understanding was that some children's series and manga would allow us to put the series heading in there.
And graphic novels.
Yeah, graphic novels.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of other children's series that are like this. So we go ahead and quickly move. I know we're kind of running out of time here, or out of time. Where go back to any questions about that as I scroll down to graphic and manga? I'm not seeing any questions. So graphic and manga is the exception. We actually do want the series title A in the 245 field. I think a way of helping make the distinction, and that might make it a little bit easier to remember, is that with graphic and manga, what we would normally think of as a book title for regular series fiction items is actually considered more of a part title for graphic and manga, and because of that, we have this particular format of a subfield A where the series information is the most important, and the particular item that you have is really a part of that larger series. And so all of that information would get included in the 245. Obviously, we can also have graphic and manga is a series subtitle, and so then you would have all a subfield A, a subfield B, and a subfield P as well. Let's see. Generally, if I'm sure you all know, we don't include 490s and 8XX fields for graphic and manga, but there are some exceptions. We discussed this and realized that in the catalog there is a lot of confusion because we have a number of instances where, for instance, graphic series and non-graphic series have the same series title, and so the only way to distinguish between the two is to actually include a 490 and 8XX for both the graphic series and the novel series. So a good example is The Walking Dead. I think we're getting more and more of these kinds of cases where you might have a novel series that's being redesigned as a graphic series, so we might see a little bit more of this. But then another instance is with some of the DC Comics and Marvel Comics series where there have been relaunches, and so they tend to have the same series title, and the only way to distinguish the different relaunches is by adding additional information. In this case, a date is what helps separate the different relaunches series. So you're going to see that in a number of graphic series, and Heather's done a lot of work to get these graphic series to make sense. If you do come across other ones that where there are relaunches and these distinctions haven't been made, please do contact the mentors so we can work on cleaning that up. So one last note about the subfields, subfield P and subfield N with the graphic series. Normally, right, when you see graphic and manga, it'll get listed. We'll have a subfield A, a subfield N, and then a subfield B. So it's the volume of a particular series, and then we have the title of that particular volume. With some graphic series, however, we find order is different, because in this particular case, it's actually volume 1 of this particular kind of sub-series. Time runs out of the Avengers, and it's really important to pay attention to this and get the right order. This comes up with the Pokemon series because there are multiple Pokemon adventure series, and so if here, for instance, there are items that are Pokemon Adventures Volume 2, and then in that case, the subfield N would appear after Pokemon Adventures, but in this case, this is specifically Volume 2 of Diamond and Pearl Platinum series, and so you want to make sure that you're distinguishing between that and, say, a Volume 2 of just Pokemon Adventures. and then even within, I'm trying to remember here. Oh, and also you'll notice here, right here we have Pokemon Adventures as the series title, and here Pokemon, and these are actually different series as well. So the point is you have to be really attentive to the correct title of the series for some of these, particularly with these graphic manga, because very often you can get series titles that resemble each other, and series subtitles that are very similar as well. And so if you don't have the exact title, then these two can get confused. Sorry, trying to rush through this information. I don't know if that was very clear. Any other questions? I don't want to hold people too much longer today. Everyone's being really quiet.
I think it's been lots of good information. Thanks, Anna.
Do people need another session? So we said, that we should have another session specifically on authorities. Is there any desire for another session on series, on specific aspects of series? Yeah, it's a lot to digest. So it's probably best if we did do another session on series, it would be something kind of much further down the road as people start working with the document, start trying to kind of adapt some of the guidelines that we've included in this documentation, and then maybe do a follow-up further down the road to answer other questions. Okay, so I think if there are no other questions, we could go ahead and close this out. And of course, feel free to contact the mentors if you do have any questions about series.
All right, thanks, Anna.